So in this video, I'm going to show you something that is not, it has not been asked on the community. It's something we came across with, internally and with Dave. So we have, you know that we have a custom, an action button, and one of these action is a launch process. So with it, you can call any process you have, and you can pass information, get back some information. So it's exactly like here you have a process, you want to trigger this process, which has an input variable, and then if it had an output variable, you would get the output and continue your actions, for example, with a set property to set a field with the value of the process. So which means you don't have to use a rule to trigger a process, you can do it from the UI as well. So we have that. So but let's say that you want just to do one thing. Here, for example, in this service, I do two things. I generate a password, and here I update the record with password. But let's say that I have something even more simpler. So what I want to do is I want to generate a password and get it back. So I want to do something like that. So let's say we have one input parameter, like the login, and I have an output parameter which will be the password. So I want to do something like that. So here will be my login, and the output will be set by, oops. So I want to set the output by, so generate password, I got my password. So I want to do something like that. So I want to do something where I give it a login, I get back the password. So, but you can see this process is like calling one activity. So it's a bit overkill to call a process just to get one information from one service. What if you could call generate password directly? So you could say that, yeah, generate password is a service. So technically I could create a REST API. Inside the REST API, I'm calling generate password service and sending it back to the UI. Once again, it's a bit overkill because you have to create a custom REST API. You might have to create a custom view component or JavaScript action to call this REST API. So you might have to create like two objects just to get that. So in this case, it would be better to just do the launch process method. So what I'm going to show you is how to call one activity specifically from your code. And you need to do that on the backend. So why would we want to do that? It might be very interesting, for example, for a connector. So a connector might be, for example, to get information on Jira tickets. It could be getting a list from ITSM tickets from your ITSM system, or whatever your connector is doing, actually. So what I want here, as an example, is to get a password. So I got this page. So this is my username. I click on generate password, and I got an hello password. This is my password. So I called the generate password activity we showed earlier. So how can you do that? So I have username, I created a view component, and I'm passing the username description field here. I'm passing it to it, and I'm going to display it. So my view component is trigger activity. It has one input variable, username. The HTML code is simply the button. So when you click on it, it's going to generate the password. It's going to call get password, and I'm just hiding and displaying two things while I'm calling the REST API. So here my view component is calling custom REST API, and inside the REST API I'm calling the activity itself. So I'm doing exactly what I told you not to do, which is fine because it's me. But I'm going. The reason why I'm doing that is because in a process you cannot. The output of the process cannot be a list of objects, for example. So a collection. So sometimes what you might have is a service or an activity that is they can just send you that. You're not interested in getting the first object from this list, you want just the complete list. So in this case you are just interested like get me the list of all tickets in ITSM. So you want to say, oh, well, connector, I'm calling you Pokemon style, I'm calling you, I'm giving you HPDL desk, I'm saying I want all incidents past this date. The connector executes, gets the data, and sends back, and the REST API sends the information back to you. So in my code, what I'm going to do is when I'm clicking on get password and I have a username, I'm calling, I have a resource, and I do call generate password. So we just have, like we saw in the couple of videos, I created a REST Angular object with this URL for the custom REST API. Some examples, trigger activity call generate password. And here the trick is, it's not really a trick, but you could do something like that, call generate password with your username and pass it to the get. But because you just do it this way, I mean, you're not changing anything. You can just use this shorter version, this shortcut. So you can just say, well, when I call generate password method, that means that actually whatever I'm sending to this one, I'm sending to this one. So this way, technically, you could remove these lines and you would save maybe 10 lines of code. So anyway, I'm calling this REST API, passing a username, and when I get the result, I'm getting actually an activity result. So it comes back with an output and an object. This is what happens when you call an activity. This is the output, and inside of it you have an object or list of objects or whatever might be. So this is on UI side, that's pretty much all. So let's see on the backend how it works. So we have REST trigger activity.java. So let's see. So we have one REST API, trigger activity, call generate password username. Username is a parameter. And what we want is, here we want to trigger activity generate password that we coded earlier. So we have a service, and here we have generate password. So you could absolutely instantiate one simple service, and inside of it call test me, and generate the password this way. But in this case, yeah, you could do it because you coded it. So you have the source code, you can just code it. But if you are, like, for example, trying to use a BMC out of the box object like connector, it might not work because you cannot really code it that way. So how can you do that? So the first thing is you need to locate the action service object. Service. So for that you are using service locator, we saw in the previous video, get action service. With that, you are going to create a list of parameters you want to pass to your activity, exactly as it would be, for example, in the process. So the trick I'm giving you here is how do you know what is your process is expecting, what is your activity is expecting. So if you don't know, or if you don't want to know, one thing you can really do is just like I made earlier. So you have generate, you are using, for example, this one. As username, you put test. And see here, you have one input map with one parameter. So how do you know what's the name of the parameter, how to do it? You just click on JSON, and you can see that you have one input map, assign target, username. So username is the name of the input parameter, and here is the expression. So if you look in Java, I copy pasted it, so you have assign target username, and the expression was actually this one. So in my case, what you need to do is that you need to do a put for every input parameter. So here I have only one, which is username. And as a value, you put the string, the username you sent in your get REST API. So this is my input parameters. Then you need an execution context to execute your activity. So once you just create a new one and you pass the input parameter, and then you call the activity in itself. So one thing that is very important, so you're using the action service for that, you just located. So you execute, passing the execution context you just got, and you need to give the fully qualified name of your activity. So here, for example, you can go here and you can see that you have com example service generate password, com example sample library generate password. So it's actually the name of your bundle column, the name of your activity, generate password. So that's the only thing you need to be careful with. So if you want to call a BMC one, here you will have just, for example, connector. So if you don't want to remember how you do it, you just have to look in your JSON action type name. So let's go back to our JSON, and here you can see action type name, and here is a string you want to copy. So once again, if you don't want to think about it, just create a dummy or just drag and drop some stuff on the process, and you will have all your information you want, the input map and the label and whatever. I mean the name of the fully qualified name of your service, of your activity. Then I'm getting some results that is actually containing what we saw in the UI, so an output object with all your information. And we don't really care, we just want to send it back to the UI, and the UI will sort it out. So that's why here you can see that we don't have a specific object that will be mapped by Jackson. We just say, well, you know what, I'm going just to send you a map of string and object. So it is basically saying, well, you know what, I'm accepting whatever garbage you're giving me, and I'm doing a JSON out of it, and I'm just sending it back to you, and good luck with it. So this way, if you have a list of objects or anything, it will just work, and the UI will have to figure out somehow. But you could do something a bit more. You could create a class, trying to map it using JSON, but this is just the easy way of just getting the output and just sending it back, and the UI will do something about it. So once again, how you want to call your activity is you need to locate the action service. You want to set up your input parameters map. You want to get the execution context, and your execution context is going to execute your action. So here is how it works. So like I said, it could be very useful for connectors. For example, especially if you don't want to use launch process from an action button, but from your code. So it can be called from Java only. So if you want to use it from the front end, from the UI, you will have to create a REST API that will do pretty much exactly like that.